Another method you can use to issue a vendor credit note is to generate purchase order lines by copying a previously posted purchase invoice. The copy feature is time-saving because it prevents you from having to enter the original purchase information again. You can use this method when you must match a credit note to an original purchase order. Use the original pricing when you copy the original purchase order. This will eliminate any variances that can occur if the purchase price changes after the original order is invoiced. In addition, when you copy the purchase order, the system makes sure that the returned quantity does not exceed the original quantity received from that purchase order. It also creates marking in the inventory for offsetting the cost effect of the vendor invoice. This process is typically used by accounting to process the financial impact of the return. The physical return process is usually handled by the warehouse management team, which you can learn about in the warehouse management course. Let me show you how to do this in AX. In AX, I'll go to the procurement and sourcing module so that I can create a new purchase order. I'll do this in common and then in the all purchase orders form. I'll click the new purchase order icon to start a new purchase order, and then I'll select my vendor. I'll click OK, which will open the purchase order details form. Here, instead of manually adding items to the order, I'll go to the Purchase tab in the Action pane and use the Create Credit Note button to generate the credit note from another purchase order invoice for this particular vendor. Here you can see all of the invoices for this vendor. You can select the invoice by marking the Select All checkbox. In the case that the purchase order invoice that you're copying from has multiple lines, instead of using the Select All checkbox on the top half of the form, you can optionally mark individual lines on the bottom half of the form. Here, you'll notice the quantity. If required, I can modify this quantity to say how many need to be returned. By default, this will be the entire amount of the purchase order line that was invoiced. Let's say I just need to return 2 of these. So I'll update the quantity to 2. At the top portion of the form, you'll notice that there are several checkboxes. Many of these options are disabled, which indicates that you cannot change the settings. The first is the invert sign. This is important because we want the quantity to be negative for a return. Next is the Copy Charges checkbox. This will copy any charges such as freight or handling that were on the original order. The Copy Precisely checkbox will copy the order settings precisely with the exact values that were used on the original. This is important because I want the new credit note to have the same terms and information for the header of the order. You'll also notice that the Copy Order Header checkbox is selected. On the lower portion, you can see a Delete Purchase Lines and a Recalculate Price checkbox. The Recalculate Price checkbox is disabled because you do not want to recalculate the price. When you're creating a return, the price on the return should match the price on the original order. You could optionally select or deselect the Delete Purchase Lines. If you had already copied lines into the order and you were performing this function a second time, you may choose to clear this checkbox so that the lines you've already added to the order are not removed. Now that I've set all my settings, I'll go ahead and click OK. Here you can see the line is added to my purchase order, and if we scroll to the right, you can see the quantity is updated with the quantity that I entered into the Create Credit Note field. If required, this quantity can be modified here. When you're ready, you can go ahead and confirm the purchase order. You may not want to send this to your vendor, but it's still a required step because you cannot receive or invoice the order until the purchase order has been confirmed. So here in the Purchase tab, I'll go ahead and click the Confirm button. Now that my purchase order return is confirmed, we can start to receive an invoice. Oftentimes, the receiving process is not used. This is because the warehouse will handle the return of the physical products manually through some other process. However, if you wanted to generate a document to put in the box with the items to be returned, you could generate a product receipt. This is done by following the standard steps and procedures for processing a product receipt. I'm going to skip this step and go straight to the invoicing step. So I'll click the Invoice tab in the Action pane and then click Generate Invoice. Once the vendor invoice form opens, you can enter the invoice number. If the vendor has provided a document to you with the crediting information, you could enter that number. If you are generating the credit note on your own, you might consider using the purchase order number with a CR at the end. You can type in a description for the invoice, which can be printed on the check when you generate it. Up at the top, you'll need to make sure that the default quantity for lines is updated correctly. If you posted a product receipt, you can use the product receipt quantity. Otherwise, you'll want to update this to use either the ordered quantity or the receive now quantity. Here you can see that the line is now added to my invoice. You can update the dates for posting, and if required, three-way matches can be performed. When you're ready, you can go ahead and post the invoice by clicking Post and then clicking Post again. If required, you could print this document to send it with the check remittance, or you could mail it to your vendor. I'm not going to print this. I'm just simply going to click the Post button. Now that you have seen how to post and process a vendor return by using the credit note functionality, we'll look at the last method for issuing a vendor credit in our next lesson.